The atmosphere in the room was electrifying. It was my first time meeting Laura, and my father Cameron introduced us to each other with an enthusiasm that quickly faded away when I felt her penetrating gaze on me. Hi everyone, my name is Mandy, and I'd like to share a story about my new stepmother, Laura. I began diving into the narrative. It was clear from the first few moments that Laura didn't have the slightest sympathy for me, as evidenced by our awkward interaction in the living room. Her smile was artificial, but it didn't hide her true emotions. "There's Mandy," my father said, trying to smooth things over. Leonard's response was not at all what was expected. "I will not have you living under my roof," Laura stated with such coldness in her voice that it made me uncomfortable. I was shocked and glanced over to my father, who seemed oblivious to the impending storm in his own home. "You're just my husband's daughter, nothing more," Laura continued, as if her words were a blade cutting through the silence. The room grew quiet, and I tried to catch the full extent of her antagonism. "You're too young to expect me to care in any way," she said. I barely found the strength to reply, trying to keep my composure. "I just want my father to be happy," I squeezed out of myself. Laura's eyes narrowed and a worried smile appeared on her face. "You're already in the way, baby. And don't try to be snippy with me," she said. "I know how to deal with useless teenagers like you." The tension in the room became more and more palpable, while my father seemed to be completely unaware of this venomous play on words, continuing to enjoy our acquaintance. He had no idea that this first tense acquaintance would be a harbinger of the difficult years to come. After that day when we first met, Laura's hostility became a constant factor of discord in our family life. It was more than mere indifference. It was a real campaign against my presence in their lives. One day, as I secluded myself with a book in the living room, Laura walked past me, casting me a glazed look. "Don't think I'm going to replace your mother," she muttered caustically. "You're just my husband's daughter, nothing more. I'm not looking for a replacement," I objected calmly, trying not to give in to the situation. "I just want to be a part of this family." Laura grinned sarcastically and waved her hand as if to dismiss my words. "You're still a teenager. Don't expect me to worry about you," she continued. Her hostile attitude manifested itself in little things that hurt nonetheless. She began accusing me of ridiculous things, like spoiling her food. "Look what your daughter has done, Cameron." She said, handing him a plate of spoiled food. "She deliberately ruined my food because I refused to cook for her. She might poison me one day too, Daddy." "I swear I didn't know anything about that," I exclaimed, feeling offended. "I ordered takeout and wasn't even home until you came back." Laura's eyes flashed with anger. "Oh my God, now she's also lying, Cameron. You have to get rid of her before she ruins us both." These incidents were only the beginning of a long list of grievances. Laura deliberately created an atmosphere of resentment, carefully crafting every move to make my stay in the house seem unbearable. As the days passed into weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that her actions were just a preliminary part of a darker plan. As time passed, her methods of pressure became more and more subtle, turning our home, which had once been an oasis of happiness, into an arena of endless skirmishes. False accusations and thinly disguised humiliations became part of her constant campaign against me, affecting every aspect of my life. One day, while I was on an important call, the connection was suddenly cut off. I thought it was a technical problem, but I soon found out that the phone line had been disconnected. Passing by, Laura said with irony in her voice, "Mandy, if you want something from me, ask for it directly. Don't make me waste my time with your phone." She once locked me out of the house for a full 5 hours during a storm, claiming it was an accident, though the look in her eyes said otherwise. You should learn to be more responsible and always carry your keys with you, she said reproachfully. On the day of my important exam, Laura had a new game. She hid my car keys, and I missed the exam. Oh, I think I accidentally put them away, she said with a look of innocence. Maybe if you'd been more organized, it wouldn't have happened. But the most obvious act of sabotage was the destruction of a project I'd been working on for a week. Look at the mess your daughter has made of the house, Cameron. Her projects take up too much space, she accused, pointing to the workspace she had deliberately trashed. Dad, that was a very important project, I said, trying to hold back tears. Laura methodically built a web of hostility designed to make my stay in the house unbearable. Over time, her cold and calculated actions became more and more sinister. As the years passed, her stalking strategy intensified, turning our home from a safe haven into a battlefield. The relationship with my father became strained, marred by her manipulations. Every corner of the house was a reminder of the struggle, and I began to wonder how much more I could endure until the dust settled in this house. But when I turned 18, I realized it was time to take my life into it. Was a moment of change, a chance to break free from Laura's manipulative influence and start building my independence. Dad, I got a job, I said, a spark of rebellion flashing in my eyes. I need to manage my own finances. I can't let Laura control every aspect of my life anymore. My father, torn between his love for me and his desire to keep the peace in the house, looked at me with pride and concern. Mandy, I appreciate your determination, but are you sure this is necessary? He asked. Yes, Dad. I can't go on living like this. I need to minimize Laura's influence over me. And the way to do that is financial independence, I replied firmly. My new sense of control extended far beyond finances. I began to make decisions that reflected my individuality, from dinner choices to how to spend my time. Stepping back from the toxic atmosphere Laura had created, I began to see a path to self-determination. One evening, when Laura tried to interfere with my plans, I confidently state, I appreciate your concern, Laura, but I am old enough to make my own choices. I don't need anyone telling me what to do. Her response was just a dismissive wave of her hand, but I wasn't paying attention anymore. Laura, why don't you explain why my things are packed? Are we going on a surprise vacation? I asked, trying to maintain nonchalance. But in the back of my mind, I knew Laura wouldn't do anything nice without second thoughts. Don't play smart, Mandy. I hope you remember my words. I told you that as soon as you turn 18, I'm kicking you out. Laura showed her self-assurance, smirking, showing her satisfaction. Leaning against the doorway, I couldn't help but smile understandingly. Well, it's time for you to leave. I decided to be a good man and pack your things. It'll be easier that way, she said, assuming I had no choice. The surprise I'd prepared for Laura was safely hidden in my bag. I pulled out a packet of legal documents and held it out to her with a wry smile. I think you need to look at these papers first, I said. Laura, at first surprised and then wary, took the papers. As she began to read them, her expression changed. The papers stated that my father had transferred ownership of a share of the house to me on the day I came of age. Laura realized that now she couldn't just shove me out the door as she pleased. That can't be true, she muttered, flipping through the pages. Oh, but it is true, I said calmly. Daddy did it to protect me. He knew what you were planning and decided to take steps to secure my future. Laura was visibly shaken, and now she realized that her plans had fallen apart. She was no longer in control, and for the first time I felt that I had truly achieved independence. Laura looked at me, her eyes sizzling. She hadn't expected this turn of events. How dare you? Her voice shook with anger. "You think you can just throw me out of the house?" I stood on the threshold of my room, feeling the weight of each word give me strength. "This is not only my home, Laura. It's also my father's home. And I can't have you continuing to poison our lives with your manipulations and games. You gave me a month when I came of age. Now I'm giving you the same period of time." Laura frantically flipped through the pages, looking for a loophole, but I knew there was no way out. The documents were signed and authenticated. My father, seeing how far her manipulations could go, had providentially secured my legal title to the house. "You can't do that," she whispered, but there was no longer the same confidence. "I've already done it," I replied, "and I didn't do it out of revenge. I did it to protect our family. You could have been a part of it, but you chose a different path." Laura stood sandwiched between the pages of the eviction notice and the reality she'd created herself. In that moment, I realized that independence is not only financial freedom, but also the ability to protect myself and my loved ones from toxicity. And while I was sorry the situation had come to this, Laura, her face pale with shock, stared at me silently. "It's impossible," she whispered, but there was no longer any confidence in her voice. "Yes, it is possible," I continued, "and it's legal. Daddy always knew the house belonged to me. You just didn't know it. And now that I'm an adult, I can decide who lives in my house and who doesn't." Laura shook her head, unable to believe what was happening. "Cameron would never do this. He loves me," she said, but her voice sounded unsure. "Daddy does what he thinks is right. He takes care of our family, and that includes protecting me from you," I said. "You took advantage of his kindness, but that won't happen again." Laura looked at me as if trying to see the lie in my eyes, but all she saw was determination. "I want you to leave as soon as possible. You can get your things, and I'll even help you find a new place if you need it," I continued. She sat up slowly, trying to understand how her life could have changed so quickly. I don't know what to say," she uttered. "You don't have to say anything. Just realize that everything that's happened so far is over. You can start your life over again somewhere else, and hopefully better," I said, feeling like the moment had come when I could finally breathe freely. Laura, still stunned, stood up silently and walked slowly to her room to start packing her things. I remained standing on the doorstep, staring after her, feeling that a new chapter of my life had begun. Laura looked at me, her eyes full of disbelief and confusion, trying to understand how the situation could have changed so suddenly. "You're trying to scare me," she said, trying to sound confident. "You can't do that." "No, Laura," I repeated firmly. "This is my home now, and I've decided you don't live here anymore." Laura tried to find lies or subterfuge in my words, but my eyes reflected only the truth. "You can't serve me with eviction papers," she continued, but her voice was already losing its former confidence. "I can and I have," I continued. "All the necessary formalities have been observed. Dad has shown me all the documents that prove my right to own the house, and he supports my decision." Laura, exhausted and realizing that her position had been undermined, put the documents down on the table. I have to talk to Cameron," she said, almost in a whisper. "You can talk to him," I said, "but it won't change the facts. You have to start looking for a new place to live." Laura stepped back slowly, her gaze blank. I felt mixed emotions, for I was asserting my right to the house, but I was also destroying her world. Yet, I knew it was necessary for my peace and well-being. The despair and denial on Laura's face was replaced by shock when her father stood up for Mandy. "Laura, you have no right to decide when Mandy should leave home. It's not your decision," the father said. His tone was firm and allowed no objection. Laura tried to object, but her father raised his hand, stopping her. "I've always said that Mandy can stay here until she's ready to leave of her own accord. This house is her home, and it has always belonged to her. I was just a guardian until she became a—" Laura looked at her father as if trying to find the lie in his words. "But it's our marital property. How could you just give her the house?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That house was left to Mandy by her grandparents. By their will, it was supposed to pass to her." Her father continued, "Most parents kick their children out of the house as soon as they turn 18. We have to get Mandy to learn to live on her own and become responsible," Laura said. The expression on her father's face became hard. "That's for me to decide. You are not and never have been her parent. You weren't even involved in anything to do with Mandy. How did you decide you could decide when to kick her out?" Laura realized that her position had been undermined and that she had no power over Mandy or the house. She tried to find support in her father's eyes, but there was only determination there. "You owe Mandy an apology, and if you can't respect the rules of this house, perhaps you should consider finding another place to live." Laura was shocked. She hadn't expected her father to support Mandy, and now her plans had been disrupted. She rose slowly, avoiding Mandy's gaze, and without a word, left the room. Mandy stared after Laura, then turned to her father. "Thanks, Dad," she said. "There's no reason to thank you, Mandy. You're my daughter and I'll always be at your side," he said as he hugged her. "You'll always be home here until you decide to leave on your own." Cameron, standing between the two most important women in his life, felt the tension in the air become almost palpable. He looked at Mandy, then at Laura, and took a deep breath. "Mandy," he began, turning to his daughter, "I realize that Laura has put you in a difficult position, and I apologize for not noticing it sooner. But I can't have you kicking Laura out of the house. This is her home, too, and she's lived here since we were married." Then he turned to Laura, "And you, Laura, shouldn't have pressured Mandy. She's still young and just beginning her journey to living on her own. We all need to find a way to live together in harmony." Laura, feeling her position weakening, tried to object again, but Cameron raised his hand. "We're a family," he said firmly, "and it's time we started acting like a family. Mandy's staying here until she's ready to leave, and no one's kicking her out. Laura, I expect you to support me in this decision. We should be supporting each other, not fighting amongst ourselves." Laura realized that the battle was lost. She nodded silently, realizing that her attempts to dominate the house were over. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll go pack my things," Cameron said. "You don't understand, Laura. No one is going to leave. We'll find a way to get along. We're all equals in this house." Laura looked at Cameron, and there was gratitude in her eyes. Perhaps for the first time, she felt accepted as part of the family rather than a threat. Mandy, standing off to the side, watched, feeling relieved and hopeful. Perhaps this was a chance to start over and build the new, strong family relationship she had always wanted to have. Mandy stared at Laura, trying to discern the true intentions behind her words. The time spent in conflict had left a deep mark on their relationship, and Mandy knew that forgiving Laura would not be easy. "Laura," Mandy began, her voice calm, but with a firmness in it, "I appreciate your apology. However, words can't erase the years of tension and pain you've caused. Forgiveness is a process," and Laura nodded, realizing the complexity of the situation. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Mandy, but I sincerely want to try to make." Cameron, who'd been watching the conversation the whole time, decided to step in. "Forgiveness is something we should all strive to give and receive." But it also takes time and action to confirm the sincerity of the words. Laura, you have to show that you've changed, not just with words, but with actions. Mandy nodded, agreeing with her father. Daddy's right. I'm willing to try to move forward, but it will depend on your actions, Laura. You have to show that we can live here together, in peace and respect. Laura looked at Mandy, then at Cameron, and took a deep breath. I understand, and I promise to do everything I can to rebuild our relationship and trust. Cameron looked at Mandy, then at Laura. Let's give ourselves a chance to start over. We'll start with a clean slate. The silence in the house was finally broken when they all agreed to give the relationship a second chance. Although the road to healing was still long and difficult, they had taken the first step toward reconciliation and the eventual rebuilding of the family. In the silence that followed Mandy's words, the weight of shattered expectations could be felt. Laura stood, stunned, as if the words she thought were the key to redemption were useless. The desperate look in her eyes indicated that she understood the gravity of the situation, but the realization came too late. Cameron, who had been silent until that moment, felt it was time to intervene. Mandy, he began, you're right that forgiveness comes not only with words, but with actions. And Laura, you have to realize that trust isn't rebuilt quickly, but we are a family, and I believe in second chances. I don't want our home to be divided because of past mistakes. Laura, feeling Cameron's support, found her voice again. I realize I've made mistakes, and I'm willing to work to correct them. I'm ready to show you both that I can be better. Mandy looked at her father. Then I hear your words, Laura, and I want to believe you're telling the truth. But trust isn't restored instantly. If you really want to change, you're going to have to prove it. Cameron nodded. We'll give you a chance, Laura, but realize that it won't be easy and will take time and effort on your part. Laura nodded, meekly accepting the terms. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Thank you for this chance. The silence that had hovered in the room gradually dissipated like morning fog under the warm rays of the sun. All three remained in the room, each immersed in their own thoughts about the future, but the shared desire to heal and restore the family was clear. Though the path ahead was uncertain, they decided to try to walk it together. If you enjoyed this video, support the channel, give it a like, click the subscribe button and bell so you don't miss our new videos. Join our growing community and stay tuned for updates. Thanks for watching, and see you all again on the channel.